And join us if you are able, as I read this pledge of allegiance. Thank you. I would like to now introduce our board of directors. Tonight we have Cindy Coe, Madeline DeMatenon, Tasha Woods, Kathy Day, and I'm Mike Rowley. We're also joined by our superintendent, Troy Turno, executive director of teaching and learning, Jennifer Kuntz, and our student representatives, Amari Thorne and Yutong Liang. Board, the first action item is our consent agenda. We have the opportunity to review these items individually and seek clarification from the district admin prior to our meeting. I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the consent agenda. I'll second it.
Kathy has moved that we approve the consent agenda. Cindy has seconded. Board, any discussion? Call the vote. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Consent agenda is passed. All right, board, that takes us into administration. And first up is our student reports.
Yeah. All right, so for strengths, we kind of asked our some students for some strengths and areas of improvement. So one of the big things that we've heard over and over again is that the administration has done a great job at being more present and involved in students' lives. So being at things, so being at sporting events, popping up in club meetings, and being there right at the front to greet students as they come in, and just being a lot more involved in the students' day-to-day lives, where a lot of students have gotten to know like quote unquote scary people in the office, right? So that's just something that a lot of kids have really gotten to enjoy, is getting to know the people that they may not have known quite as well prior.
I'm going to talk about some feedback and suggestions. So for the high school, we talked to a few students, and they thought communication with like schedule changes when we have assemblies or things like that could be a little bit more accessible, like student bulletin for those who might have online classes and then in person. And then something for us actually that's really useful. Students are kind of talking a little bit more about how we can be more involved and how they can know how we're like accessible. So although we can like send out surveys and student for our like data so that we want to get, they're just more ways to be able to access us. Yeah.
And one last thing that I'm pretty excited about, I'm pretty excited about it. NHS is working on a student closet. So it's a big project that we're working on for things that the student may need throughout the day. So they've got something at home, like supplies for the project, or say, they need yoga, they need socks, or something happens, right? So just a no student closet where there's things that they can stop by and grab throughout the day. Maybe they need a snack or protein bar, something like that. So just resources and materials that a student might need in any given day. And it's all the students. So it's something that NHS is working on, and it's something that I think would be a huge benefit for the students.
To add on to that, they provided us with some, I guess, data, but the donations that we've received from the community is almost equivalent to $12,000, which is crazy. And then other club updates, HOSA made some like send-off cards for sport in the district, and so I need to move in that to spread positivity. And then the student voices started up at EHS. We're trying to get that started, and I'm really excited about that. So more updates on that soon. Thank you.
Board, any questions or comments? All right, thank you, Amari. Thank you, Colin. Next up under administration is the EHS mid-year update, and Bo Snow. Bo, you're welcome to sit up here or stand there, whatever works easiest for you.
I'll stand up here. Well, first off, I want to say thanks to the board, and thanks to Dan and Troy. This year, I mentioned this when we did the fall one, but this is the first year for a lot of us that this process actually meant more than just paper. And I want to applaud Jen and Troy for the leadership to, this is something we've been living and working on weekly in our Monday meetings. And so this is something that, like, I feel way more confident standing here this year than ever before talking about our mid-year review, simply because of the effort and time that we've been provided in the leadership, and like, let's make this a living thing that we're actually doing and checking. And so I learned a lot in this process, and some of the things are I learned that I made mistakes, and we're going to talk about that as well as the outcome so far. So we can move to the next slide. So at Ellensburg High School, we had two primary goals, as everybody did. An academic goal, which for us was to close the gap between our IEP students and non-IEP students. And then our social emotional goal was to raise the reported sense of belonging at EHS. The measures, and we'll talk more about the measures in a minute, is kind of where we realized that we've run into some issues. Not the CE survey necessarily, but in actually measuring how we're closing the gap for our IEP students is much more complicated and complex than originally we thought. So as I mentioned, we picked the wrong goal for our academic piece. And then what I mean by that is we still need to work on what our, how our IEP students are performing. But what we realized is that the language should have been more about academic achievement versus closing the gap. The primary reason is that we simply, for our gap, realized that the data is skewed because it shows how many students didn't test. It drastically impacts the outcome score on the Smarter Balance assessment. If we had all of our eligible students test, the gap would have been significantly different. And so when we dove into this, and I'll give a lot of credit to Jen for helping me through this process, like when we look at the data, it's not that our kids definitely performed on IEPs at a lower level than students that are not on IEP. But the data that we judged and built this plan off of was skewed by the number of students who simply did not test. So realizing that, you're going to see when we talk about some of the data, how we had to look at it and approach it in a little bit different way. Last year, of the students that tested, 33% completed it. And of those students, 33% of them actually passed. Well, that number isn't reflected in the gap that we saw and that we talked about at the beginning, because the gap should be about achievement, not necessarily about how the statistics are measured versus IEP versus non-IEP. So realizing that, the goal that I selected in the fall is a good idea. It's just not statistically very easy to track, especially until we take the Smarter Balance assessment. And like I said, in number 4, the learning is achievement would be more relevant than the gap at this point. Go ahead, listen. But there's a lot of good stuff. Winter math scores. So for Smarter Balance this spring, our 10th graders, the projection is. And what that means is that when students take a math test, there's an ability, if you look at math tests and you use their website, they will give you a projected score on what Smarter Balance will mean. So a correlation between their winter score and how they will perform on the spring test. So In ELA, 13% of our students on IEP would be at a level 3, which would be passing. 23% would be at level 2, and 54% would be at level 1 or did not test. One of the pieces we'll also find articulated a little bit more is that some of our IEP students are also some of our students that don't attend school at a rate we would like. And when you're trying to test on certain days and certain windows, and the MAP test closes on a certain day, if students miss the 4 or 5 days that we're testing, they don't have a test score, which is also an issue when we talk about for smaller rounds. Math, 7% would be at level 3, 42% would be at level 2, 51% would be at level 1, or did not test. What that translates to is if this many students, if the same number of students take the smaller balance test that took the winter math test, we would significantly lower the gap because we would have significantly more scores tabulated. This is where the gap, the issue is that we would have the gap shrink, but we still would need to target the achievement level that those students are achieving. So highlighting the goal to close the gap, good goal, but we should have focused more on the achievement. So the data you're going to see is on the achievement of students in the winter. And we will, in the spring, when we get the results, we will calculate the gap and measure the gap because it is important. But really identifying our students making progress towards achieving a level 3 of proficiency on the smarter balance is we're realizing is a goal that we probably will set in the future when we write the plan again for next year. That will be a goal we will put down. Go ahead, Betsy. And monitoring our set goal, I realized, and if you've ever seen the CPE website and the data dashboard that we have access to, there are a million tiles, there are a million things to look at. And one of the things that when I calculated our data from the fall, I calculated with the wrong number. I should have used the one that said specifically student belonging because it does it for me. Instead of having to wade through the multiple tiles to calculate on my own, I should have used the dashboard point that was there, which was actually higher than I stated in the fall. And so when we took the CE survey in December, the data came back and our data went up. It didn't go up as much as we set as our goal. So we still have work to do with that. And we are working on new things. Utah mentioned, and both Utah and Mario are part of our fellows program that we are working on with the grant. We're really excited about it. Marcello is our ESD rep who's been coming and working with the admin team, but recently has worked with a group of students and staff to build some kind of our cafe questioning event that's going to happen next week. And so out of that, we will have 40 students, 8 staff members doing a cafe event around questions generated by students to highlight and target an issue that they want the school to address. A student-driven process that's actually student-driven, not the admin stayed out of the room, in fact, because we wanted the students and staff to feel like it was their process, their opportunity to work on building a goal that has nothing to do with what I think or what my admin team thinks should be the goal, but actually a goal generated by the students. So we're really excited to support the group in working that process. And then out of the cafe next week, we'll have data around what students want to highlight the goal. And then the process works from there with Marcello. The students work with Marcello to build and develop a target. And then we'll spend the next year working on the projects and how that plays out in the building. So we're really excited about that piece. And I will show some later on our progress monitoring stuff, other pieces that we're doing to address the social emotional. So here are the process and practice goals that were in our plan, and we'll look at some of the data as we're going. These are things that are when we're looking at the academic goal. Some of these pieces have highlighted some areas that we really don't have as a system yet. And so building and working through that process, we've learned a lot as a building, and our special services team deserve a lot of credit because I've been asking a lot, because with our goal being around students on IEP, they're crucial for me to find and access the data necessary to say, are we making progress? And so that has been, there's been a lot of learning, a lot of things that we've identified as barriers that we have to figure out, because we have not done a good job in the last few years of actually tracking some of the pieces that are relevant to the growth in this area. The students are working hard, the staff are working hard, we've never focused on the things that we're focusing on now. So that's been a positive learning experience. The social emotional piece you see up here, and the data will be highlighted in further slides, but really targeting this piece to work on how do we pull out from students what they want to see, how do we engage them, how do we encourage them to participate, how do we encourage them to reach out to resources that we have. It's been a really interesting process, and it's, you know, some of the feedback that the student rep shared is positive in terms of how students see the work that's happening, but we still have more work to do. There's a lot of things that we need to tackle in this regard, and so we're optimistic that we're building pieces to the puzzle and keep working on one piece at a time. Go ahead. So some of the progress monitoring pieces, this is some additional data, like I mentioned it earlier. These are some of the achievement pieces that that we were looking at for our students on IEP. So in ELA, 58% of our students on IEP showed growth from fall to winter. 39% showed more than average growth, and if you're looking at RIT scores, MAPS outlines what their scores should be, and so the scores that we looked at were average growth is 4.1 points on a RIT score, and so if students scored more than 4.1 or grew by more than 4.1, they're growing more than what would be expected. So 39% of our students on IEP showed more than average growth, which is good. 6% scored around the same, and then 32% of students scored slightly below what they did in the fall. Math, 57% of students showed growth from fall to winter. 39% showed more than average growth. 7% scored the same, and a third of students scored lower than what they did in the fall. One of the pieces to this piece as well is that we're realizing the limitations of map testing. One of the issues for map testing is it doesn't disaggregate by groups the way we can other tests. For example, finding the data for students on IEPs is not as easy to click. You don't just get to click the IEP button because it's not in the system. They're not grouped in the system that way. So in order to gather this data, we had to go kid by kid through the entire thing. So the 145 kids that are on IEP, not all 145 are going to take the map test. You have to then narrow the list and go one by one through all of their maps data. So it was a good process, but it is not something that is very fast. And so we're realizing that in order to make decisions off of data, you have to be able to go at a pace where you can see it and then make adjustments. So looking at how we do that process and how we work with our data is something that we are getting a lot better at. But we're also looking at like, wow, it's a lot of work. It was a lot of time. I spent individually over 10 hours just with the data that I had, and then the staff did that much more times 5. And so it is a lot of work to figure out specific information for students that are on IEP based off the map. One of the things we're looking forward to, and I was fortunate enough to participate with the district team that worked on identifying our next data platform that we're going to get to use. I'm super excited about the one that the district selected. We're excited about the opportunities that it will provide us to do more individualized grouping for our school and for our needs, and then be able to track them in a more meaningful way. So we're looking forward to that piece coming up. Oh, sorry, the last slide was just the 9th graders. 10th graders in ELA, 47% of students showed growth. 5% students earned the same score, and 48% of students scored lower in the wintertime. One of the reasons, and this was an interesting piece for us, for example, our sophomore class, attendance is an issue, and attendance for students that are on IEP is an issue. So the reason you see some of the higher numbers for students who were lower, a lot of the students didn't test both times. So I didn't feel good about saying, oh, we're only going to cherry pick the pieces. if they didn't test and they tested in the fall, they didn't score higher, I put them in the category of, they scored lower because they didn't test. Which is a data point, but it also highlights something that we're continuing to work on, which is attendance. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But in math, 57% of the students showed growth, 10% scored the same, and a third of students scored lower than what less than. So some of the progress monitoring pieces that we did around academics, we held an IEP night in the fall. We built a really amazing presentation with a lot of pieces that we have to offer for students. We had vendors and resources in the room from all of our partner agencies in the community. District leadership was there, Lori Gilling, our school sites. We had all the players in the room, translators, everything. One parent showed up. And we invited them in multiple ways. We invited every parent that's on an IEP via Parent Square, via letter, and via call. So we realized that that is a sign, and so we have work to do to engage both the students and the families in a different way than what an invitation to a meeting didn't work the way we had anticipated. And so realizing that, we've made adjustments for how we're going to approach incoming 8th graders. Next week, we have our 8th grade parent night, and so we will have a separate session for students that are on IEPs so that they can get one-on-one opportunities to ask questions, to engage with our staff, engage with everybody so that we can target it in a different way. So the hope is that we can start it when they're incoming freshmen and continue with cohort work. Not that we're going to say if you're not a 9th grader, you aren't going to have access, but we're going to target them coming up next week. We worked with our CEE survey. We made sure that every student and every teacher had a hard copy of accommodations so the kids could take it with them so they could advocate for themselves in class. We actually started meetings with departments. It was really pretty powerful to see our special services team go into a department meeting, and they went kid by kid in every class to talk about what each kid needs to be successful in. For example, in history, students don't have IEP goals in history, but all of our students on IEPs take history class, for example. And so being able to have and facilitate that conversation and dialogue around each individual kid in all the various classes, it was a pretty cool thing, and we're working hard to make sure that we are able to duplicate that process more frequently than once in the fall, to provide time in the PLC process for that to occur. So progress monitoring some of our SED work. So one of the pieces that we implemented a couple of years ago is we wanted to know how many students were articulating mental health needs in the building. And there are a couple of different ways that we're approaching that on a pretty regular basis. One of the pieces for that we do is when students check into the counseling office, we have them fill out a Google form every single time. When they come in, before they see somebody, they fill out why they're there. What is the reason? If you look, this is current up through the 13th of February when I started building the presentation, but you can see that there are almost 2,300 visits to the counseling office, and it articulates why are they there. And if you look down, I don't know, hopefully you can see it in your packet, but the majority of our academic base, others, for example, I received a note, I came down because the counselor called me down. Some of those we realized they were called down because of mental health check-ins. And this doesn't necessarily say mental health check-in on the note, but if you look, there are other pieces like personal. So roughly 10% of the visits are personal. A lot of them out of that are around social emotional stress issues, the ability to fit in and participate. And so 10% of our student visits are identified to our counseling staff and to us as working on their mental health. And so we are continually looking at this. IPLC with our counseling staff every week to really talk about how do we improve the process, how do we make sure we're offering or tracking what's happening in a way that respects both the counselors and the students. Many, obviously what happens with counselors is a confidential piece. And so tracking exactly the nature of all the conversations is very difficult, but gathering the data as they enter, it helps us see, is the need growing, is it shrinking? Are we seeing, peaks and valleys? And yes, the peaks around the semester when grades are becoming a reality, et cetera. But it has been a valuable tool for us to track how students are doing and what's happening throughout the year. This is something that students have built to them every week in advisory. We do a bulldog check-in, and this is a copy of exactly what it looks like for students. Name, grade, what's going on. If you feel like you're at 5, and you will see on the next slide they get to articulate why they feel the way they feel. So they're feeling down, they get a chance to say why. Would it help to talk to someone today, counselor, an administrator, any other person that they want to identify? They get an opportunity to share that as they're going. Go ahead, Leslie. The way that it looks on our end is we get a spreadsheet. I cut off the section that identified student age, but it shows you what the response is, how it shows up for staff, so that we can act on it. So if they identify, you can see their score 1 through 5. If you see the next column, if they get to explain why. The next column is, whether they need to talk to somebody. If they indicate yes, that's where sometimes the notes come from. Like if our counseling staff says, oh, this kid said, yeah, I need to talk to somebody, that's our indication, and we get a flag, we get notified, and that's part of the process of how we continue to check. And then they identify who, and then some identify particular individuals. If possible, we connect them with that particular individual. The feedback from students varies. It depends. Some weeks it's 400, some weeks it's 200, some weeks it's 500. It just depends on the week, and it depends on if students want or need to fill out the survey for that. But they have the opportunity every week in advice. Go ahead. Celebration. We have been working really hard this year on attendance, and what that looks like is that every week we print out the previous week's attendance by grade level. I do seniors, the other 3 administrators work on a specific grade level. We've been doing it all year long. And our positive attendance rate is up. One of the things that we really cut down on is, because it's funny, right? Students are smart, they know if you're checking and monitoring. They're very aware of when Tuesdays roll around, because that's when we all do attendance. And so on Tuesdays, there's a lot of students that get to come visit with us. And on it says, as of February 20th, we had 2,037 student contacts and 801 parent contacts. And that ranges from every sort of behavior thing you can imagine. But our attendance contacts are 4 times what they were last year, with the dedicated effort they were spending working with kids and families on their attendance. And the way the attendance process works is that we get an opportunity for that face-to-face contact to do exactly what Amari was talking about, have the relationship, have a conversation, tell us what's going on. If a student is missing a significant amount of school, there's a story to be told. There's a reason why, whether it's classroom-based, whether it's home-based, whether it's I work 2 jobs at night and I'm taking care of my siblings. Those are things that we get to find out in those conversations. And then a lot of times we can follow up with students would be potentially better served by talking to the counselor than they would serving lunch detention. Or you need to meet with our mental health specialist. Do you need to do these other avenues that might address the problem more than just a consequence? And so that has been really positive. It's one of my favorite parts of the week. It seems like the more you work in administration and the higher you climb, sometimes the further away from student interaction you get. And so it's been great. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to meet with seniors And as we're closing in on graduation, Leslie panicking today, telling me she has 7 days of school left, and for seniors it's 64. You get to have a lot of interesting conversations around what's happening, and so that's been really positive. It's a huge thing that we're celebrating as an admin team. In the fall, overall, for our 9th and 10th grade students that took the math test, 3 of the 4 math tests, we showed high growth and high achievement. So you've probably all seen the quadrant screen where you have the upper right is where you want to be, which is the green zone. And for us, 3 of our 4 tests, all the students were high achievement and high growth, which was awesome, and we really wanted to celebrate that. All of our certificated staff are being trained on the updated Danielson framework. One of the pieces that I was committed to this year was becoming a trainer with Danielson. And I wanted to do that so that I could work with staff all year long on what's about to happen next year. And so it has been a really successful process to talk about their practice, how they work with students, and what the changes are going to mean for the profession for them going forward. So that's been a huge celebration for us that we've been working ahead, which is positive. We talked a little bit already about the Fellows Project. It's up and running, it's going, and we're really excited about seeing where that process leads. This fall, we had the largest homecoming dance in Ellensburg High School history. 671 students crammed themselves into the commons. We might need to look at a larger venue in the future, because that was very hot and stuff. It actually took 2 hours later. Students, it took 2 hours to get into the dance, because if you imagine lining up 671 students and checking them all and checking ID and checking bracelets, we have to work on our process because it was way too slow, and we're realizing that it's an awesome thing to have 70% of your student body at the door. But it's a whole other thing to get them in and have them have a good time if they want. So we're working hard on that, and we wanted to celebrate that. That's a pretty amazing turnout. Athletics, we're fortunate at Ellensburg. We have a lot of really competitive teams. We took 2nd in state volleyball, 3rd in state in girls cross country, 3rd state in boys cross country. We sent multiple swimmers to state. Girls basketball is headed to state again. And we just had 6 wrestlers compete at the state wrestling championships last weekend at the Tacoma Dome. We had 1 male wrestler finish 2nd, and one of our female wrestlers finished 5th. She's the 3rd female wrestler in Ellensburg history to place the state. It's pretty cool. If you saw the fall play, the Harry Potter play was fantastic. Winter Musical is going right now. From having been, you should go. It's always a hit. Band, choir, orchestra are getting ready for competition. We usually do really, really well. We have certain individuals that are testing for all state, and then in the past we've had students go to all national, so we're looking forward to that. 2 of our testing students qualified already for nationals, which is a huge deal. Anytime you put the word nationals next to something, it is a big thing for high school kids. And for a school our size to have the success we have, it is truly remarkable, and it speaks to the community. But most importantly, we got great kids, and so it's awesome to highlight that. FBLA, FFA, this is CTSO competition season, and CTSO are our CTE clubs opportunities, and so that's FBLA, FFA, TSA, Skills USA, and FCCLA. They're all prepping. Last year, I know we highlighted, we sent a team to nationals for a couple of different teams to nationals for FFA, and the state is set to do the same. And again, it just highlights the cool stuff that the kids are doing, and we just get to be the adults that celebrate. So those are the celebrations. Questions?
I have 1 or 2, actually, both. Maybe I'll ask you about the social emotional goal first, because that's simpler. The fellows program, you mentioned, or the EHS fellows program. I'm just wondering if there's a way to track who those kids are who are most engaged in it, because I think there's a tendency for those students who are already involved in clubs and everything else, who are already feel a sense of belonging and identity with the school, to add this as one more dimension of that. And the challenge is to, and it's an honest challenge, I mean, like, to reach those kids who are not engaged, or those families who are not engaged. So I'm just wondering if there's any element in getting the fellows program going, in tracking who's already involved in a number of clubs and who's maybe being invited to participate more.
That's an excellent question. I can outline the kind of the process that, and again, one of the cool parts about this is it's not my process. It is the process that we use. It's set up by ESD, and they work in numerous schools with the same types of issues. So the way it worked is any student had the ability to apply. And then one of the things that we were really wanting to target was a balancing of group of our marginalized students, so students that we know either come from minority groups or groups that are typically underrepresented, and then we are majority group. And so the way that the group is set up currently is we have almost a 50-50 split of students that come from an underrepresented group and then students that would be considered coming from a majority group. And as we move through the process, we're taking steps to make sure, like when we're doing the interviews and stuff next week, we have the groups divided and we highlighted staff members that students requested because they felt safe with them. They felt like they could share. So we highlighted those staff members and pulled them in. And then we also have the groups will be sharing and doing the answering in groups that the counselor went through and helped decide this would be probably the most successful group. So it is something that we are considering. I think one of the challenges that all schools face, and ours is certainly no different, is that exactly what you're saying is that it's great to have highly motivated students that want to do everything, participate in new things. But it's also important to make sure that we have students from groups that are typically not represented as a part. And so we feel confident going forward. We currently have a good balance of that. I think as one of the benefits of this program grows is that the fellows will be able to, so the 40 students that are there will be able to encourage and invite peers that maybe are from that think alike, or their friends, or just simply, you know, in their peer network, to bring them in and invite them into steps that goes forward. So the 40 that we have are not the 40 that it will be limited to. The 40 that we have are the 40 students that volunteered to participate in the first phase. And so from that, we will choose our leadership fellows, so the students that will move forward as the leaders. And then we will be encouraging more and more students as we're going to work with us in that process. And so as we continue, the goal from ESD and our goal is that it will continue to bring more kids in and grow the process to participate along with them.
Thank you. Then my second question is about the academics, or the academic goal, and we had an email exchange about this today. This is part of me just trying to figure out, okay, when you state a goal and then you collect data to measure that goal, like how do those two things link together? So I mean, I totally understand your explanation about like what MAP does and does not allow you to do in terms of comparing an IEP and non-IEP students. But it seemed like the revised, like if you had been able to revise your academic goal, it would have had to do with the achievement of IEP or students on an IEP. And then, but the data that you gave in the presentation was more about growth than achievement. So
there was the one slide that talked about the projected proficiency that would have meant, that would have been like our achievement piece.
right.
And so that would have been, had you wrote the goal around achievement, that would have been the prevalent information, or the information that would have been, did we meet the mark or not? Since we didn't set the achievement goal out front to identify what our target would have been, I put the data in as a slide of, hey, here's what it projects our students to be proficient. If we were able to rewind and start over, that would have been, we would have articulated growth around the achievement for the projected achievement for those students and then measure it against that. Since we didn't have a projected goal, I put where we were at currently. We'll look at the gap data at the end of the year, but we'll be able to report at the end of the year also did they meet or not meet that threshold by, but that's a great clarification.
Yeah, I guess my other thought was just, I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but it seems like the gap that you were originally looking for is relevant. I mean, it's a way to measure, or it's a way to set a goal for like, how well are you doing in terms of educational equity? So it seems like a comparison at the end of the year, again, that SBAC allows you to do, would still be helpful information for you to know and also for us to know.
Thank you.
I just had a couple points of clarification. So is the Fellows Project linked to the Sparks Student Voice Project? Is that the same thing? Is it a piece of
The
Spark
Spark grant is what pays for the Fellows Project.
Okay,
The name that Marcello, like they like to call it a Fellows Project, so the name Spark is a fancy name. Spark is the grant that's paying for the Fellows Project. Correct.
okay. And then the statistics for the counselor visits, that doesn't include a mental health specialist or an SAP, right? Those are visits that are happening, but we don't have numbers for
Correct.
those.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And then as far as the, to piggyback on the question about academic goals, are we just using the maps and the SBAC to look at what those IEP students are achieving?
So we, well, for the sake of what was on the SIP plan, yes. What we're learning is that other goals are super important. So progress monitoring is something that is required for all students on IEPs. We were gathering the progress. The challenge with progress monitoring is that as different IEPs cycle throughout the year, different goals and things are changing. And so, like, we have progress monitoring data about growth and how many and the percentage that met the goal. I didn't have that though at the time I built the presentation. We're working on gap because one of the pieces that I'm really working on with our special services team is looking at and evaluating, are the models we're using working? Are for example, co-teaching? We have a lot of staffing and energy invested in co-teaching, and so I wanted to provide Jen and Troy and when we're working on decisions coming down for staffing and things. So we have a whole nother data set that we're compiling for that, which has a lot more of the detailed progress monitoring kid by kid by kid, which is super relevant. And I think one of the things we're learning as we're going through and having a roll around students that are on IEPs is that what is the right way to report it accurately? And I'm learning too that we have 5 staff members that record and get the data differently. So we're looking at finding ways that we can do that the same, finding ways that we can store that information and data the same, so that this process doesn't take the mining process that we found, where we're diving into 25 spreadsheets, 10 databases, different things. And so we're trying to streamline how we're documenting and then monitoring those things. I didn't have all of that data at the time I was building this, but we're working on building that because it is something that we're finding in this process that we need, and we need to be able to monitor and track it faster than we currently are able to do. So yeah, great question.
Sorry.
Mine's quick. This is probably more for Troy and Jen, and it's on the subject of the IEP part of what Bo was talking about. Are we seeing like an increase in students with IEPs in the district as a whole? Obviously, I just was kind of curious. It's about 18% of the high schoolers are on an IEP, but are we seeing kind of a growth in our district, or is it just kind of steady right now?
We're not seeing a significant growth at all. Although interestingly, Lori was just telling me that she has an unusually high number of referrals at high school, which does not necessarily mean that they will all qualify. But just good.
I just want to thank you. This was a really clarifying presentation, and it really pointed to, like in your words, that we need the data, we need it to be more easily accessible, and so that tied in really nicely with the adoption of Aubrey and bringing that in and helping that align systems, and also what District Admin had shared with us and just aligning systems work. right? The people have been working really hard, the teachers are highly intentional, highly passionate, the kids are working really hard. But we're finding the system, with this, intentionality and looking at, just need a couple of tweaks and supports, so thank you for sharing that and clarifying.
Board, any other questions for Bo at this time? Thank you very much, Bo, for your presentation tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right, and next up is Michelle Bivich with the Morgan Middle School year update.
Hey, everybody. All right, well, I'm gonna echo a lot of what Bo said in terms of picking better goals next year. It's such a learning experience to go through the process and go, "Oh, that seems like a much better idea when it started. But the reality is that we're still, even without having the most refined goals, we're still looking at data and looking at achievement in a different way and really digging into that. So that's worthwhile in itself. So go ahead. So just quickly, as a reminder, what our student output goals are. In English language arts, our goal is to have our student growth percentiles be at the 50th percentile for all subgroups. We're looking at a smarter balance on the proficiency to get to proficiency on central idea as a target area, and then our EL progress rate will go from 25% to 40%. In math, the student growth percentile would be at 55th percentile for all subgroups. And we really targeted that algebraic expressions target so that we could, the staff had an opportunity to kind of, what's the high, like, where's our leverage points? What if we really were to focus on a particular area, what's going to get us the biggest bang for our buck? Interestingly, our student growth percentiles, while that was a grand idea, we just got last year's released this last month. So it becomes like a 2-year goal because you can't, it's not going to measure anything we've done this year. So that was my aha yesterday. I was thinking, good news is we're starting to really show some growth on the WISF, which is the Washington State Improvement Framework. But it's not based on anything we've done this year. And so we'll be looking at just stretching that out and maybe looking at what's a better measure that we can actually have progress monitoring along the way. That's not just smarter balance. And then our social emotional behavioral goal was we had 3 identified statements out of 9 that were identified on the CEE survey as being connected to students having self-agency. We chose 3 to try to move to above the 75% positive responses. Again, I already worked with our coach from Aussie, Office of Schools. That doesn't matter, our coach, because really, again, that needed to be a 2-year out goal because we take a survey in November. So all the work that we do from November to June or to the next November is really what we should be measuring. So, but we have some good data to at least show progress on those things. So go ahead, Leslie.
Oh.
Yeah.
It didn't go.
The bachelor's on that is the best benchmark we have at the secondary level. And so in our reading goals, the top bar represents the percentage, that's the growth percentile. And the second one is the achievement from fall in the left to winter on the right. So in 6th grade, we went from the 51st percentile as our median percentile in fall to the 52nd in the winter. In 7th grade, we stayed at 61st percentile. And 7th grade teachers were like, we're like we're the 61st percentile in the nation. There's nothing, you stayed the same, that's okay. And then for the grade 8, we went from 52nd to 55th percentile for our median score. So showing them some steady growth. We're being very cautious this year about even talking about the growth part of it because the map, the company, the WIA that does maps, is going through a recalibration of their norms. So last year and this year, they've changed the test. And so it's going to be better results in the long run, But as a result, the growth percentiles are grossly misrepresented, especially in math. And so we just have to be careful that we're not putting a lot of stock into the growth percentiles for everybody. So that's just kind of an overview of the reading. Go ahead. And then this chart, the diamond represents what the average expected growth would be for each grade level. And then the blue represents how much observed growth there was. It's important to note the scale on the side is only half points. And so the expected growth for sixth grade is just under 3 points. They grew at 4. The seventh grade teachers, of course, again, they're like, okay, the diamond is 2.2 is for the average growth, and they grew at 2. And then in eighth grade, it's that, so. So we're checking those things, we're monitoring that. This is the high level stuff. We're digging into the individual kid data too. So the teachers are doing a great job having conferences with the kids about where were they at, where are they gonna get to, having those really intentional conversations about helping the kids understand that they can set goals and they can work to achieve those goals. And so, but this is just the high level data. Okay, go ahead. So in math, completely ignore the growth bar. This is just the chart, and so I didn't want to try to cut all that stuff out, but completely ignore that. The RIT score, however, is still the RIT score, and so that is with the raw score that the kids get. And so in sixth grade, the median score went from the 36th percentile to the 47th percentile. In seventh grade, from the 50th to the 52nd, and in eighth grade, from the 27th to the 34th. So they significant shifts in our median scores for math. It's pretty exciting. Go ahead, Dustin. And then this is the observed versus projected growth for math. And it's the scale is different on this one. The other was half points for each bar, or for each line. This is a full point. Okay. The one thing that's good about the math scores is we did one thing right. We did a lot of things right, but one thing in our writing our goals is that we targeted the algebraic expressions, algebraic equations for the map or for the target area. And the nice thing is that map actually does break down into some subject area, some smaller areas that help us. So this is the sixth grade. This is the fall breakdown for sixth grade and the winter for sixth grade. And so the overall, we want kids, we want yellow, green, and blue. That's our goal. Yellow is proficient. And so in the fall, if you look at the operations and algebraic thinking strand, which would most closely align with our school improvement plan goal, at the time, I can write it down, but I don't want to do math on the fly. 42% of our students were proficient in algebraic thinking in the fall. And so when we took that same piece of evidence in the winter, we're now at 63%. So that tells me that that should give us a good indicator that we're on progress to make progress on the goal that we set. So pretty exciting. All right, go ahead. All right, this the SEP goals. We had those three statements that I talked about that were tied to that were tied to those three statements. And one was I enjoy coming to this school. I'm disappointed in our results. There's no question. They weren't what I would hope that they would be. I'm excited about the energy that's happening towards making progress on this right now, but as of November, this was not the case. So we actually dropped a point on our positive responses in the overall, from 42% to 41%, but we did increase the neutral. So we took kids out of the orange and red and into the neutral. So that was also progress. The one area that we had highlighted was our Hispanic Latino population. We were at 20% saying positively that they enjoy coming to school. We've increased that to 29%, and the neutral grew by several percent. So some progress, but not at all where we want it to be. And then next slide. Two more areas, and I paired these. So if you look at the one I did in the fall, the presentation, it's paired pretty closely, so you can compare the fall and winter. But for the top one there, it's the school doing a good job of preparing me to succeed in my life. Stayed about the same, 61% in the fall to 60% positive. So we didn't make any gains there. But the Hispanic population, we did make some gains from the 56% positive to 67% positive, so that was encouraging. And then, my teachers tell me the purpose for each lesson or activity. I'm here to tell you, I'm in the classrooms, hearing the teachers, and I see the learning targets, and I hear the conversations. There is a disconnect somewhere between that and what kids are hearing, and so that's what we need to look at, because we actually dropped significantly in this, and I'm seeing more of it, so. So one of the things I want to do in student voice circles is to have kids help me understand, what would that look and sound like to you? Because clearly what we're doing as adults, they're not hearing as kids, so we need to somehow close that gap. So, those are the 3 areas for social emotional that we had measured in the fall and on our school plan. Go ahead. Then we can talk about how are we going to get there, what were our goals for getting there. I didn't list every possible thing that we were going to do. This is just the highlights version. That we wanted to really work on our instructional practices around emphasizing academic vocabulary. Those effective use of those learning targets and success criteria that the kids don't think that we tell them. Having intentional strategies for student engagement, and then a revision of our win time, which is what I need. Time for the kids to be able to get support during advisory. And then connecting with our families, students and assessment partners, student voice circles, and then under social emotional, we've been working on resetting our advisory program. Our comprehensive school counseling plan was aligned to fit within this. Working on our Tier 1 attendance team, and then again having some family connections with that. So those were the ideas for how we're going to get to those student outcome goals. Go ahead. So I wanted to just highlight a few things. The win time during advisory has been a big shift for us. One of the things that as a secondary system we don't have is the luxury of things like an elementary school where they can just school-wide or grade level wide have just this block of time that they can go do intervention and enrichment. And then we have to kind of make that up for how that's going to work for us. And for 2 years, we worked with Mike Hagedorn from Solution Tree, and he had helped kind of at least prompt some thinking about how we could do it a little bit differently. So we were working on that this year, so that we went from having 1 day a week where teachers could identify, hey, I need to work with these kids, to 2 days where we have it divided, and the teachers are paired with an advisory teacher. So, so like the student on the top line there has their advisory teacher plus their partner teacher. So they happen to be going to Mr. Bradshaw's class on a Thursday, and then on Friday, Ms. Alexander's going to take them, and they're going to work with them. If a student's not selected for something, then that means they're going to either their advisory teacher or their partner class, so that they have time for working on typing agent, because we know that our students do not know how to keyboard. Working on missing assignments, those kind of things to stay. So that's a big project that we've been working on this year. Constantly need to be tweaking it. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but way more kids are getting way more support by doing it this way. And then I wanted to highlight some peer observations that we did. So this is a practice that is called out specifically in the CE survey, that this is a professional development strategy that we had done years ago, and then just sort of fell away and blame all sorts of things. You know, being split school and COVID, and there's a few things that happened in that time, but we're bringing it back. And we did our first one that we've done in last year. I had my building leadership team participate in one and kind of say, yep, we're committed to this. And so this year I just said, anyone who wants to, let me know. And so for the first one, I had 10 teachers they were for a half day. And so they went and spent the morning going and visiting other people's classrooms. But the purpose is not just to go into that classroom. They go in there and they have a form that they're looking at, like, hey, did you see a learning target? Did you hear the learning target? Are you hearing classroom discourse? So they're capturing some ideas. But in the end, the real question is, how is this impacting your practice? And so then when we come back together at the end of that, they got to see 5 classrooms. And when we come back together, they do a chart of what would I remember the first 2 were now that I'm looking at that, but Strengths. Oh, just what did you wonder? And then what were the considerations for my practice? And so that's the part I really want to highlight, was because what they're walking away with that, from that is. I need to allow more movement in my classroom. I saw this really cool thing in that science class. Hey, can I get some whiteboards so I can try that? So they start seeing, how did I not think of that? Like some things, the simplest things. Did you see that person put, crack me up. They put their numbers for their desks on the legs so the kids can't pick it off. And so they have the numbers on the legs, like the things that we don't think about, somebody thought of, and they just take that away. So it could be something as simple as a management strategy. But more often than not, it's an engagement strategy. And so they were really excited about this, the things that they were seeing that were connected back to the work we've been doing this year. One of the areas that we talked about that we were doing to help support specifically our ML students, but really every single student in our building, is working on classroom discourse. And this was part of my wildly important goal, my lady that we talk about every week. And so my ML teacher, Hannah Rupel, we call it Rupel's Remarkable Resources. She provides PD for our staff about once a month at staff meetings, and so just takes some time to really get a small chunk of something that people can walk away with. And she's been building this resource folder for our staff. And so these are a couple of the things that she talked about. The talk room, which is a way to help kids talk to each other, giving them sentence stems, giving them question stems, things that they can have engagement conversation with each other, because it's not about talking with the teacher. We want the kids talking to each other about their learning. And then the 10 and 2 method of something as simple as just chunk your time. Like, hey, we get it. There's times you have to stand in front of your class and give some direct instruction, but after 10 minutes, stop and give them 2 minutes to have a conversation. Or a 10-5-2 is one way, a version of this, where you take 10 minutes to whatever you're doing and 5 minutes to do your journaling or your processing of that, and then talk about it. So being able to have some strategies and some, just some tools that they're toolkit to be able to engage. Because our CE survey came when it did, and because I really did not feel good about our results, it just didn't. I wanted to look at some other things. So I took all of our discipline data from Skyward from the first semester of last year and then the first semester of this year and made this chart. And I was super excited about this because the blue is last year. And so when you look at, and I really could have picked any category. I picked categories that I felt like students were disengaged, might choose disruptive, inappropriate behavior, cell phone use, or physical altercations. So I picked those 4 categories to say, are kids showing by the way they're behaving that they're feeling more connected and more engaged? And there was just no question about it. So that was, and then when I showed this to the staff on Monday at our staff meeting, somebody goes, I can feel that. so the culture is starting to shift and starting to see those good results. Go ahead. Attendance not too much. We are working to learn from our high school colleagues because they are doing some amazing work. It's a little bit more challenging to have those same conversations with an 11-year-old about what is it going to take to get you to school, because sometimes it's, well, I'm going to shop for my Halloween costume. And I was like, oh, that's great. They can't get themselves to school. They can't. So we just have to figure out how to middle schoolize some of the work that they're doing, because just taking a direct translation of what Bo and his team are doing, we tried and we started having this conversation when we're absolutely getting nowhere, because we have to not just engage our kids, we have to also engage our families. And that was what the big aha was. How can we shift our thinking about that? So our celebrations, go ahead. There's a lot to celebrate, and it was encouraging. This time of year, you start to feel like you're just slogging through, and it's just like, wow, the dark days is so nice. I'm so blessed we came in some sunshine. Get through our January, February grade time, because that grayness sort of just it can feel oppressive. But so when you go through this process and you start really looking at data, it's really good things happening. So I already highlighted all of this, but I just wanted to capture, based on our school improvement plan, the celebrations. There's a million things to celebrate with our kids. I just kept it. So. What questions do you have?
Michelle, I have a quick question on the previous slide on attendance.
Yeah.
For slide 15. Could you just label those for us?
Yes.
So
Sorry.
73.9.
So this is the rate, this is the rate of regular attendance, which means these are kids who are attending at 90% or better. And so the blue on the left is all students in the district. And so that's holding pretty steady at 57.8% of our kids in the district are attending 90% or better. But at Morgan, we were at 73.07% last year at that time. At this time, and we're at 71% right now of kids who are attending. They're missing, so they, at this point, we've got 100 days in, 110 days in, so they've missed less than 100 days. Yeah.
I just had a question. I'm so excited about the peer observation, because that can,
It's
just,
so fun.
yeah, it can just be so,
Yeah.
it you know, it can change the way that you teach depending on what your opportunities are, but how are you, what's the system for that? Like, if people.
So it was completely voluntary if we wanted to participate. My goal is for everybody to participate. So what I did, it's like a giant Tetris puzzle to try to put that together, because I had people from all different grade levels want to participate. So in choosing 5 classes for them to go through, because it's about 20 minutes per class that they get to go in and see a snapshot thing. So I wanted to choose at least 1 class from each grade level, and then, and I was upfront with the team, the teams that participated. I wanted to make sure every single team, because so of the 5 people stayed for the morning, 2 went with one group, 3 went with another, so that you don't overwhelm the classroom by having like all of a sudden there's 8 adults standing in the back, that's super awkward. But I made sure each of the 4 teams, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, all got to see 6th grade math, because there's some really big new things happening there that I wanted them to see. And then kind of what fit. So they weren't necessarily going to see all advanced classes. They weren't necessarily, like we had in the morning group, we have a half an hour of advisory, and that's really not something that would be worthwhile. And Joan Smith said, we actually do our advisory stuff at a different time if they wanted to come in and observe some academics in my class. And so they did it, and it was awesome, because teachers have the words they used to describe Joan class was high care and high accountability. And I was like, that doesn't get any better than that, right? So so it really was partly based on who was available for having classes. And then I put the schedule out, and I hadn't really asked anybody like, hey, is it okay if somebody comes and serves your class? Because I just figured the goal is to change the culture so that that's just normalized. And so I didn't say, though, if you're like getting a test, let me know so that. And I had looked at it, like we had subs. It's like a big giant puzzle, but they got to see 5 really different styles in the classroom environment. So, and then next week, my math team, because again, the 6th grade team is doing this work with the building thinking classrooms, and they can come and highlighted that with you in the fall, because they're doing that, and because our 7th and 8th grade teachers are like, yes, we better be on board. So next week we're doing math learning walks, but the 2 6th grade teachers are going to stay in their classrooms and teach, and the rest of the team is going to get to go in and observe a full class period with each teacher, so they can see the same essence but a different style of how they approach it. So.
Board, any questions or anything? I just want to say, Michelle, that the one slide that you shared about the monitoring process of the discipline referral comparison, that's actually pretty impressive that it has dropped considerably. So let's hope that keeps going in that direction. So, yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, for all the information, we appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. Come by anytime.
Thank you, John. All right.
Sorry, can I
Yeah.
ask a quick question? This is for Troy and Walden. As far as the feedback that we've been getting, as we're hearing these school improvement plans about kind of, fine tuning goals and, what that looks like as far as when you're actually receiving the data. What does that, look like going forward when you're thinking about next year's improvement plans and how you're picking these goals or fine tuning them so that, the data that you are able to pull from is as current as it can be?
Well, there's a couple of things that one is having, as Bo said, fully functional, data system to store it and make it easier. So I'll able to help with that. And the other part is that next year we will have the strategic plans, which draw our goals from. Whereas since that's not going to live document or anything that anybody's been focused on, the process this year was really just look at whatever the sort of data was bothering you in your school and do that. So it'll be a little more, every year we do this, like when we talked about this last spring, is creating a cycle. We'll get tightened up on the things that we're tracking and what we want to look at, and the schools will have a much more, they'll just be better versed in how to do it. And really the thing is that we have not as a district really ever looked at or used data in a meaningful way in our goals. So this year was a way for them to get started and just figure out, what it was, and everybody got fairly ambitious, which is great. But we'll also have those lessons learned about what are those things that you can really dig into to monitor throughout the year. But it's also, there are just a lot of things in education that are going to be, processes over multiple years because the data just lags. Ultimately, a lot of the results we have to look at lag. As Michelle said, the list of stuff isn't coming out till finalized, and we've seen the preliminary data, and then there's a month or two where you can check or dispute if you don't think something looks right. So I mean, it's coming out from last year's data, last school year, that will be coming out in a week or two, middle of March. So there are always going to be a little bit of lag in some of the things that we want to do, but we're getting better just as a process of looking at it, setting a goal, understanding how to measure it, keep it out in front, and then recognizing what we're doing. So.
All right. Next up on the agenda is Jen and the teaching and.
I can do it.
Okay, so some February updates. So Leslie gets that going. You and I'm on my joining my screen, so changing that up on you. The first thing I wanted to highlight that happened in February was just this is time of memorial training. I had let you guys know that we had that training in middle school, but we had that completed for our 3rd through 5th grade teachers as well, and that was facilitated by Nate Bradshaw. I was able to stop into those trainings. It was a really fantastic session where teachers really, I think, walked away feeling a lot more comfortable with how to implement that particular curriculum. So that was exciting to see, and Nate did a great job for us. Brought in some of the more local pieces because not all of the, since time immemorial training is particular to the more local tribes, the Yakima tribe. So he was really able to bring in that particular piece and ensure that we're training more place-based too. And then I do have some math winter report. This is sort of hot off the press that you guys have heard multiple schools now talk about the problem with the math data in particular because of the new algorithm they're using for the test. So yesterday, late in the afternoon, I got access to a report that has concordant data, which means that it is accurate data as it would be reflected if it was based off of the new norm group, which will be released this summer. So I haven't even had really time to go through this platform that they gave us and disaggregate in lots of ways, but I grabbed a couple of pieces that I thought were particularly interesting for us to look at today, so we can go ahead and click to the next slide. This one is, and I'm sorry it's so hard to read, it's really tiny up at the top, but up at the top, it'll kind of tell you what you're looking at for each of these slides. So on this slide in particular, this is all of our students across the district. You'll see one section for math and one for reading. The purple line is what is expected proficiency percentages on the SBA in terms of like generally speaking across the nation, or this one is based off the SBA. So students that take the SBA, you would expect to see this number of students proficient. And one interesting thing is even just how it changes between grade levels, because some of the grade levels when you look at the learning progression, there's a larger weight with cognitive demand on that learning progression and standards in certain years. So even that's a little bit interesting to see, but the orange bar shows you the projected proficiency based off of their MAP score. So they talked a little bit, Bo talked about that projected proficiency. There is a correlation between MAP, a pretty strong correlation between MAP and SBA. So this is the projected proficient for all of our grade levels, only up through 8th. I'm not sure why they don't include high school on this particular one, but so you can see one that stands out immediately is 8th grade math. I don't know what's going on there, but that is a significant one that stands out. On the next slide, I then broke that same chart down by school. So at the very top, you can see which school you're looking at. The one on the left is Ida, and the one on the right is Lincoln. So you can see some differences across our buildings in terms of projected proficiency. And by grade level. And on the next slide, you'll see the other 2 elementary schools, Mount Stewart and Valley View. So, excuse me, those views are around achievement, they're around proficiency. The next couple are around growth. So on the next, well, this is Morgan, sorry, I forgot, Morgan's on there too. Which matches the very first one, because we had most of our students in middle school at Morgan. But the one after that is growth. So NWEA considers from the 41st to the 60th kind of that average, like if you're average, obviously the 50th percentile is exactly average, but they expand that band and say 41 to 60 is sort of that expected growth. And then anything above 61 to 80 would be that green color. So this shows you the median growth percentile in the school. So in each of those schools in Valley View, and this is reading, this one is reading, in Valley View, half of the students were above the 61st percentile for growth, and then half of them. And then it shows you by building. Each building's at the growth, median growth percentile. And the next slide is math. And here I included algebra and geometry because at the high school, if you are in algebra, you take the algebra specific assessment. If you're in geometry, you take the geometry specific. But we actually do have some students at the high school who are taking math, the 6+ math too. The next view is sort of a layer of both proficiency and growth. So you guys have seen this quadrant chart before. It's not as nicely colored, but that horizontal line represents the 50th percentile of growth. So we want to see people above the that horizontal line, and the vertical line represents the 50th percentile of achievement. So you also want to see students to the right of the vertical line. If they are to the left of the vertical line, you at least want to see them above the 50th percentile in growth, which would indicate we're potentially closing some gaps. So this one is for reading. And you can just see so you already saw some of this information on previous slides, it's just a different way to visualize it with achievement and growth together. And the one after that is math. I'm not sure why some of the names aren't popping up. They would if this was live and I was hovering over it, but those top two, are Valley View and Mount Stewart, which you saw those two, they were agreeing to the growth one. Okay, this next chart is another interesting way to break down the data. The top chart is how many students, so the green really means nothing. It's how many students we had in each of the deciles. So if we were a completely average system, which I'm sure there's no school across anywhere that hits evenly on 10% in each category, but hypothetically, you would see 10% in every decile. So you see where we have more than 10%, we have more than what might be expected in that particular decile. So the 0 to 10th percentile is up at the top, and then the 90th percentile through the 99th is at the bottom there. And this one is all students, math. And the one on the bottom is the median student growth percentile per decile, which I also found interesting, not just this one, but the ones that will come after. As you see, you'll notice a more significant growth at some of our lower deciles. So that one is all students math. The next one is all students reading. And again, the top one being just how many students fell in each of those deciles. The one on the bottom represents how much growth students made. And again, the yellow is that 41st through 60th. So what we want to see at least that. But you can see some of it falls below the 50th percentile, which while they consider 41st through 60th sort of typical, the 50th percentile would be what the average kid from those particular RIT scores in previous assessment periods scored in the next one. So you'd want to see at least 1150. The one after this, and you can disaggregate through a lot of stuff. This is the only one that I disaggregated for you guys by race and ethnicity, just because when I saw it, it was a bit stark. So this is looking at reading, the same view we just saw. This is reading. This is our white students. So it actually matches fairly well with the previous slide. But the following one is our Hispanic students in reading. So just curious that our highest performing Hispanic students are not growing. To ask some questions around. And then the next one is a similar view in terms of down the left-hand side. So the rows are the grade levels, and the columns are the decile growth achievement, or achievement band, sorry. And so, they are growth. So what you'll see here, when you see more green towards the left side of the screen, that means, again, it's another way of viewing that previous slide, but broken out by grade level with our students in the lower deciles are growing a little bit more than our students when as we move towards the upper deciles. And that one is mathematics. And the one below it is reading. Should I check off that? I don't know. So that's just some math updates. There's just one more update, and then you can ask questions about any of it, or you can ask questions now, but the last thing that I was gonna, or while we're on David, certain questions, please.
Can I just say what we're saying here, that math, that these slides are confusing, and that math, not just because it is, right? And math literally has webinars and conferences on this, and multiple people with advanced degrees like Jen to explain to us. But what was really reassuring is that math is administered 3 times a year, is nationally normed, it is data that can be quickly accessed by teachers and professionals in there to inform their teaching. And that multiple times, when administrators were sharing their thoughts in this process. We heard it in the fall, we heard it this time, that because the district admin are leading this and making time and space for it, they're continually going back and looking at data and strengthening their intentionality in the system of looking at data. And that is great. That is a system that will support student achievement. And I think it's really the first time that we've heard that consistently through school year. So as confusing as the green and the yellow and the orange, we've got the purple line. Thank you for taking the time to show it to us so that, you know, we later we have our questions and you guys have always been great at answering those. It really does show a system of growth and a system where we're getting to a place of intentionally using data to support student learning. And that's pretty exciting.
I have a question, and I raised this question during the agenda setting meeting last week, so I might, but it's something that's sort of being articulated through the strategic planning process. Great that we have this data. I have the question that I think you raised at the beginning, what's going on with math? Like, how do we use this data to address what seems like a deficiency? I mean, like, it seems like math, we have this curve, especially I know what's happening in 8th grade, but there's this curve that says people's math deficiency seems to be lagging with regard to expected standards. So for me, it's really important to gather data, to have goals, to gather the data, but then what do we do with it to change it if it's not what we want to see? And that's a huge question. So I'm not asking you to come up with like the plan. That's probably what all the school improvement plans will be once we have the strategic plan. But yeah, I mean, I keep wanting to think about, okay, what do we do with this now?
Absolutely, and you're right that it is the strategic plan and the school improvement plan processes that will help get some traction with movement on some of this data. It then becomes focused on actionable things to impact the outcomes. But I think you've even heard throughout the various principal presentations that one of the real challenges is, no, we haven't had a good system of looking at this kind of data in the past and creating action plans based off of it and coming back and reflecting and adjusting our practices based off of what we're learning. And we've made some movement with some of this like bigger benchmark data, which is very important to a comprehensive improvement plan process. The fact that it's normed is our way to be able to check ourselves against something that's normed to other systems. So that's critical in the process. But in a lot of ways more challenging, and a next step for us is to figure out how we're going to day track student progress towards these things, because this is not street level data. This is that high level data. And we don't want to find ourselves getting to a place where we're like crossing our fingers when they take the SBA that we hope it all turns out how we plan. We should have an idea along the way through our school improvement planning processes, because we are implementing progress monitoring tools, and that is a real challenge to get some of that more classroom level data that is targeted towards these things, that's able to be gathered in a way where we can analyze it as a system and act on it. collaborate on making sure that we're all assessing similar targets and outcomes. So it's a lot of really heavy lifting to go from not having these systems in place to getting them in place. But once they are, then improvement planning becomes a lot more smooth.
I mean, to be fair, and both of you are more eloquent than I am, yeah, there's deficiencies in our academics. You put that beautifully, like, we are not where we should be with our academics, given our demographics. We do not match what anyone would suppose. And for years, we've not had benchmark assessments or any data looked at with intentionality, and it was, I'm gonna say very, not eloquently, fingers crossed that we're gonna pass the SBAC. Literal fingers crossed. You'd go in and sometimes ask people like, well, you know, elementary kids can't type. And I'm like, we've literally been thinking the SBAC on the computer for 3 years. And if we realized that elementary kids can't type, we would not have crossed our fingers to get here, and we would have taught them to type in class. That was not the case. And so for a really long time, like you say so nicely, heavy lift. Moving a system to intentionality of using data to admitting that math is nationally normed might mean something. And is a relevant source of took years in this district to get there. So like you said it much more beautifully than I am right now. It's a heavy lift and we're slowly getting there, and like all of a sudden district admin are saying the same thing and building admin are saying the same thing. And classroom teachers are like, oh, I heard this thing called big thinking classroom, and seventh grade teachers are like, I better do something. That's incredible that those things were said in one meeting, because it's a huge deficiency academic. Like, I don't think anyone can pretend, and I think in the strategic plan, there's a lot of parents who are shocked at this public facing data. And I don't know why they're shocked at the public facing data, but Ellensburg, we need to do better and we can do better. And the big heavy lift is starting to just start seeing those glimmers of hope. Like, it really is starting.
And I'll just throw in the last part of Jen's presentation coming up, that's the vehicle. The PLC process is the vehicle to take it from big picture down to the classroom. And so that's a responsibility of our building teams to to reconcile their actions and their practices with what the data is telling us, and learn how to use that, and then also develop their own data in the interim beside before this big picture stuff. So Jen's going to talk about some PD that we've done, which is all in alignment with to try to do exactly what you're asking, Cindy.
Yeah, so the last little piece of my presentation is around PLC PD that we did recently. We every 4th or 5th-ish PLC, we take it for professional development for teachers. And this last one in particular, we really focused on various processes around the PLC process, like how to support that process. So you can go ahead and go to the next one. And the fun thing about this is we're able to highlight our own staff and find those glimmers and those bright spots and say, look what's happening in our classrooms, and here's how they did it. And the teachers that presented were very honest about how hard this work sometimes is, and there's real roadblocks. But they pushed through it, and they are excited to share how going through a PLC process, which is a continuous improvement process, the same as school improvement planning, where you're really identifying an outcome and you're looking at results and you're adjusting so that you can hit that outcome for students. And so we had 3 different sessions at secondary that teachers got to choose from. One was just a training from Formative, the platform, on how to use formative assessments, or the platform to do formative assessments, which is sort of the linchpin of PLCs, having good formative assessments. A second one was how AI can support the PLC process and save time, and that was led by Joel Bose. And then the third one was at secondary, was led by some of our high school science team, Allie, Lynette, and Kevin. And they represented all of the things that we're talking about right now, that Madeline, to your earlier question, taking taking a unit plan and saying, what outcomes do we want that are aligned to standards from this unit? And how are we tracking student progress towards those outcomes? How are we assessing? How are we gathering that? How are we visualizing data? How are we adjusting instruction? They pulled so many beautiful pieces together. They had a really great presentation. And that's the work that will get us to some of that classroom level data and help us progress monitor. Because ideally, if everybody knows what the guaranteed outcomes are for systems or for biology, then if that becomes part of the SIP, or if it's math, we know what the guaranteed outcomes are, and we have goals around the algebraic thinking part, we should be able to track our progress towards those things with classroom data. But it is challenging to get those assessments in place across classrooms and collect it and analyze it in a way where it's a well-run machine, but we are making progress, and we have teams that are doing a fantastic job, and was I think well received by the teachers in that session. And then we had a similar on the next slide, similar for elementary. There were 3 sessions. One of the sessions was split into 2 though, with 2 shorter mini presentations. So same thing, we had the option informative for our elementary teachers, how AI can support the PLC process. And then the ones led by classroom teachers there at the bottom. One was Jamie Meidel and Toby Mayer talking about their co-teaching and how they strategically plan to support language development when they unit plan. And then the second one was the second grade Lincoln team, similar to the high school science team, presenting on how they do this unit planning in a way that ensures that we're actually tracking progress toward the outcomes that we say we care about through the unit planning process. So that was really fun to see our own staff being able to shine and presenting on these things that we're talking about, that we are getting into place and being able to highlight where it's happening well. February updates.
Thank you very much, Jen. Board, any questions for Jen? Any other questions for Jen? All right, thank you very much. That takes us on to the next, Troy, and your superintendent report.
Yeah, just kind of checking in on some things we've been doing as Leslie pulls it up. First, obviously, we are in the middle of the legislative session, and our legislative advocacy in our region is still very strong. Bills associated with our big 3, which are MSOC, special education, and transportation, are still moving forward. There's a long ways to go. They're at the point where the legislature is having to start. They passed the first big cutoff date, and now they're at the stage where they're sort of waiting for the revenue forecast. But they're making plans for the budget shortfall, as well as putting money where they know they need it to go. So on the 11th, as I reported last time, I was headed to Olympia. So I went with Brian Park from Granger and one of his board members. And so we met with Senator Warnick, Representative Mendoza, Representative Monjarez, and Representative Corey, all from the minority party. So the discussions were less about the funding and more about the philosophy of what we were doing. We were very happy that all of them understood our MSOC. All of them understood that that system was not fixed with McCleary, and the lack of, even in keeping the old system, the lack of an inflationary piece to it, formula, has really left us in a lurch. And, I shared with us that we don't want to just talk about MSOC in terms of insurance. It is, maintenance, supplies, and operating costs, and all of those things that go along. Everybody's interested in insurance because they also want to regulate the insurance industry a little bit. But just knowing that in 2 years, our insurance rates have gone up over $250,000. Was a shock. And then when you look at Granger, which is a smaller district, and theirs is going up, $150,000, $160,000, and that's even a bigger percentage of their budget than it was of ours. So we were able to have some really good conversations about that. And so we're very hopeful that there is going to be some significant movement on MSOC. As we talked about, the reality of MSOC for us is it allows to buy back our levy more levy dollars that our community graciously provided us for enrichment and things like that, and we're having to use it to pay for those basic costs because the state isn't funding those and isn't keeping up with it. So, but also one of the things that was really interesting and Granger particularly wanted to talk to them about was getting them involved with school safety and if there can be more different types of grant programs or things like that. In Granger's case, it's not a problem we have. I'm very grateful we don't have this problem. But in Granger's case, they for a while didn't even have a city police officer. They've had a lot of turnover and problems in their department. Now they have one. And that person can't really, they have one person on shift and they really can't always respond. So the sheriff's department is coming into Granger and trying to help out when things happen. But they took money out of their levy to hire basically sort of a retired police officer as a private SRO, just so they could have some people on campus and they told some stories. And so that actually, there was a lot of, that led to a lot of other discussions about safety and where, you know, why MSOC is important because we could do more for safety with our own levy money, and we would certainly be supportive of having more grants out there for different things. We have are very lucky to have a very supportive and great relationship with our police department, so we don't have, you know, we have an SRO, but that it was just a really interesting conversation because the representatives were, you know, even though that those are from that area, you know, Rangers in that area, they just weren't always aware of some of those details, especially with the smaller districts are facing when it comes to that. So it was a really good day. Lots of people on the Hill that day. We also had Randy Acker from our district representing Wamoa, and Alexander was there with food services. So all three of us were on campus the same day. So it was very, very good. And I know Kathy's gone as well. And so the legislature's hearing definitely a lot from the education world and our assembly. So, all right, next slide, Leslie. Strategic planning and that process, just so kind of everybody knows, we had a relatively small group last week as we had, let's continue this week. We just got everybody's sick all you know, everywhere, but we had a really good meeting, made a lot of progress. We have 4 meetings, we have 2 more to complete our process. We're on track and looking forward to the results to be presented at the April business meeting. We have a vision statement, we have a portrait of a graduate that are completed. We're in the process of finalizing our promise statement, our commitment statements, and then through the next 2 meetings, we'll finalize those and then kind of put the schematic of the plan together. And then we can start the process of, you know, figuring out how we're going to operationalize it from, you know, we'll probably do that over the summer meeting with us. And how are we going to turn our board meetings into an agenda that we understand what's going on in the strategic plan. We're making, understanding where our progress is. We will be working with our school improvement process that the TNL team came up with this year and embedding the strategic plan into that. Figuring out, you know, how we're going to get it out into the community, you know, what we're talking about each school, making sure we structure our meetings around it. The whole thing from the vision statement to portrait, to our commitments and our promise statement and the actual meat of the plan are all things that we have to constantly have at the forefront. We constantly have to talk about, and that will be a big change for us. It just will have at all aspects and all levels of the organization. So I'm looking forward to that, but we're making a lot of progress. And so we're on track and looking forward to our next meeting, which is 2 weeks. So we have a study session next week. We go for us because it's spring break. So then the last section on this slide, go ahead and hit it, Leslie. One more. You know, continue to get questions here or there. You know, we haven't had any real big educational executive orders for a week or so, but the reality is we're constantly still monitoring that. There's really not a bunch of impact on us until one of 2 things happens. Either Congress turns the executive orders into law, because that's what actually carries the day, or funding is taken from our state. And Washington will be, if that's a path that's chosen, Washington will be one of the states that's targeted first. Basically, you just look at the electoral map in the states that were, turned blue on election night are going to be the ones that are the first line of fire. We can be fairly certain of that. But federal money, we do not receive any directly from the federal government. It all comes to us through OSPI. So it will be when our state is impacted, it could be impacted. And honestly, we are trying to get OSPI to help start making plans in case that happens. We don't know exactly what that looks like. We would be hit less hard than a lot of our neighboring districts in our region. But 7% is 7% of our budget when you consider our needs and where we're going with things. It's important to us. So it's possible that that could be impacted in the future, but at this point in time, I think we're kind of in a bit of a pattern where we're just sort of figuring out how things are settling out and where they go. But there has been no direct impact on us. I did share with you in my board update that there was an indirect impact on us through our preferred or our original equity consultant through WestEd, who was funded through the Department of Education to do that work. And they did have all of their grant funding taken away. So there are agencies out there involved in education, not necessarily K through 12 school districts, that have been impacted. And right now, probably the bigger fear, and one that could impact us in the legislative session, is their longer range impact on higher education and research grants and how much that's relied upon. So there is one very powerful state senator from the Seattle area who is working very hard to get people less interested in MSOC and try to take that money and move it towards higher ed in response to some of those grants being taken away. So there's a long ways to go in our financial situation, but at this point in time, we do not have any direct influence from any of the executive orders. That can change as soon as Congress were to actually take some of those and put them into law, or our state overall funding was targeted, and then we would have to react to how OSPI handles that. So that's kind of, we're just kind of looking forward to keep moving with the strategic plan, and then we're waiting and holding pattern for the legislature. We're still testifying and weighing in on bills as they come through. And then we're just sort of waiting to see if there will really be any direct impact to us, at least soon, with the executive orders. So, any questions?
I just wanted to register that it's outrageous that federal funding for public education, including special education and support for low-income students, would be selected on the basis of whether a state moved blue or red. I mean, like, that's sort of unprecedented in our history. And so
Yes, it is.
I know it doesn't do anything to register that comment, but as a district, as a board, I think we should see that as significant.
Yeah, it's a challenge. That's why there's a number of superintendents really trying to get OSPI to, like, okay, let's start making contingency plans. You can put out your statements, that are kind of poking the bear. But we better have some planning going on and get ready for it. So that's, we're trying to stay, keep our eyes on the prize and practicality over the situation, and just hope that we can make it through relatively unscathed. A number of our districts, our neighboring districts, that rely heavily on migrant funding to do a lot, because they have so many migrant workers are really feeling very nervous at this point in time.
Sorry, I have a logistical, it's not really a question for you, Troy, but I'm wondering, Leslie, if you could send out the dates for the strategic planning, the two further strategic planning meetings. For some reason, I didn't have those in my, and March and April. They're in.
Yeah, well, and they're between each of our meetings, so
March 12th, April 16th.
just remember we have a meeting every Wednesday until spring break.
Until forever.
Board, any other questions or discussion? All right, thank you very much for the update, Troy. Board that takes us into business, Kim is not here tonight, but I believe, Troy, you're gonna.
Yeah, just, we have standard report, it's in the packet, there's nothing abnormal about any of our finances at this point in time, so she's been, pretty sick all week, so. If you have any questions, please email her and she'll get back to you as soon as she can.
Board, any? Okay with moving on from financial update at this time? Okay. Thank you, Troy. Next up is the enrollment report.
Yeah, and you can see that in the packet as well. We're hanging in there as of this month, as of February, we're about 23.5 students over our enrollment projections. So that's healthy for our budget for this year. And we anticipate finishing based upon, you know, prior trends, we should finish slightly above projection for the year.
Questions or discussion? Thank you very much, Troy. Next item on their business is the 25-26 final calendar approval.
So yes, the calendar approval for next school year does require a vote from the board. The calendar committee has met numerous times. 25-26 is relatively straightforward and has school start date of September 3rd and finishing on June 12th. So we do need a vote to approve the calendar.
I move that we approve the school year 25-26 calendar as presented.
I second.
Kathy has moved that we accept the 25-26 calendar as presented. Madeline has seconded. Board, any discussion? I do have a question for you, Troy. We have double and triple checked that the spring break will be correct in line with Central spring break for this next year.
Yes.
All right. Any other discussion? I'll call a vote. All those in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? All right. 25-26 school calendar has been approved. And next up under business is the 26-27 draft calendar.
Yeah, so we do have it in our guidelines that we need to approve a draft calendar, which is not set in stone. You would then come back next year at this time and vote to actually make that calendar official. The 26-27 calendar is actually what's caused the calendar committee a lot of stress because Labor Day is so late, and our tradition of starting after Labor Day puts us back pretty far and puts us actually back against a holiday in June. Puts us back against Juneteenth. So there's a lot of different things to navigate in that calendar. So what we're basically looking at is to approve the draft calendar, and then we know we still need to finalize the day. There's a day that we need to decide that traditionally we haven't gone to school, whether it's the snow day, whether it's semester break day, or whether it's starting early, one day earlier. And so we do need to finalize that because we do need to fix one day, but we're leaving it as a draft because we have time to do that before we publicize it and figure that out. So it's a formality to approve the draft calendar for us then to work on and finalize it for this time next year, although we'll probably have it done before that.
And Troy, this is under information. It doesn't actually say an action.
Correct. You're it's a package deal to sort of approve both, but you don't actually have to vote on this. It just gives you a chance to ask questions and just sort of understand what's going on with the draft.
Board, any questions for Troy? I think we can move along then. Thank you very much, Troy. All right, we have two policies to read over tonight. First up is policy 3424, opioid related overdose reversal. Pass. So
Yes, we did a first reading on this at our last meeting. So there's been no changes to the one or to the policy that is proposed. It is an essential policy from WASDA and reflects changes in the law in the RCWs. So there's no change to what we did on the first reading. There have been no additions to the policy.
I move that we approve board policy 3424 opioid related overdose workers.
Kathy has moved that we adopt policy 3424 and Cindy has seconded. Board, any discussion? All vote, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Policy 3424 opioid related overdose reversal has passed. Next up is policy 3420 anaphylaxis prevention and response.
Yeah, same thing. We did our first reading at our last meeting. There's been no changes to the policy for this second reading and vote. We are, once again, it's an essential policy based upon some, the changes came from, modifications came from a few tweaks to the law, and we are already in compliance and working. It's already been part of our plan. Remember, the one thing in the first reading that we added was the language about maintaining a designated school locations and supply of epinephrine as a spray. We have those in place.
Right, I move that we adopt policy 3420 anaphylaxis prevention and response.
Second.
Kathy has moved that we adopt policy 3420 and Cindy has seconded. Board, any discussion? Go ahead and call a vote. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Policy 3420 has been adopted. All right, that takes us into board reports. You said you did not have a legislative report tonight. I do not have a board chair report either. So that moves us into community input portion. And then Leslie, can you please get us set up for public comment? Individuals in person wishing to be heard by the board need to be signed up to speak, and those in Zoom need to add their names to the document in the Zoom chat box. If you are unable to do this, individuals may also be recognized within Zoom by using the icon or emoji to show you're raising your hand for public comment. Once board chair calls on an individual, they will identify themselves by stating their name and address for the record. Individuals will proceed to make comments within a 3-minute time limit. If an individual wants to request a response from the board, this may be possible by submitting this request in writing or email to board@esd401.org. Leslie, do we have?
Yes, Andrew Spencer.
The board is not obligated to respond to questions or challenges made during the public comment period, and the board silence will not signal agreement or endorsement of any speaker's remarks. Sorry, Leslie, do you want to go ahead and call Andrew up?
Yes.
Thank you for, I just have two items. I'm restless way to go on with that.
Can you state your name, Andrew, and
oh, I'm sorry, yes,
please.
my name is Andrew Spencer. I live at 1515 North Brick Road in Ellensburg. So my first comment is kind of, I was here 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, not the first time. And I wanted to pile on a little bit on the comment about safety for our students, especially with the mayhem that's going on in DC and across country in certain instances. And I just am hoping that the board and the district has our students' safety at heart, especially those who are in somewhat fluid states regarding gender and migrant status. Because they are threatened across our country right now, and the more we can support them and make them feel safe, the better students to be. The second one is go to the musical. This is stunning. These students are up there singing and dancing and acting, and it's just stunning. I have the best room, the best seat in the house, and conducting the orchestra. It's just great. If you don't go, you're nuts. I mean, it's just great to see these students performing so well and achieving at such a very, very high level. You should be so proud of this production. It's just a gas. So I encourage you all to go. There's 3 more shows, Friday and then Saturday night and Saturday night. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Leslie, is there anyone else?
No one's signed up on Zoom. So I don't believe so.
All right. Well, I will go ahead and close public comment. Thank you very much for tonight. All right, board, that takes us into new business. Do we have any new business this evening? Okay. Takes us into meeting closing. Troy, we have an executive session. We will have an executive session to discuss matters relating to enforcement actions. It is expected to last 15 minutes. No action will be taken. No action by the board will be taken as a result. So Leslie, it is 7:31 and we'll be back at 7:46. Thank you. End of it. Oh.
What do I need to tell you? I sure do. I saw you hovering around out there.
I was gonna come in when I passed.
How are you?
Yep.
Good. Andrew Spencer just came, told us all we have to go see the musical.
Oh, good. Yeah, he's so fantastic. He's so.
Huh?
Our conversation.
Oh. Oh, wow. Hi, Melissa. Marissa.
Okay. Perfect. Yep.
Then we'll work off of that.
Anything else for board comment? Clarification, next steps. We do have some official documents to sign tonight. Leslie has those all ready for us. Board, if there's no other discussion tonight, go ahead and adjourn our meeting. Thank you very much. We are adjourned. No, that was the best thing I've ever said.